Okay, so here's the CO2 gas cylinder, which I acquired from a welding supply place. There's a regulator, which is specifically built to handle the corrosive effects of the carbon dioxide gas. The carbon dioxide gas on its own is not corrosive. It's when it hits moisture, such as in air. Carbon dioxide in water forms carbolic acid, and the regulator has to be able to handle that. This is tank pressure. This is line working pressure, which I usually barely let get off the peg, only a pound or two. Working pressure is adjustable by applying a screwdriver to that valve there. Leaving the regulator, there's a on-off, a stop valve, as it were. And the carbon dioxide gas flows out, goes along this hose, and goes through that electrically operated valve. This solenoid valve cost me $5 at a surplus store. I bought a whole bunch of them, so when the first one turned out to not operate right and was leaking by, I didn't really bother. Went back into my drawer, grabbed a second one, and hooked it up. The solenoid operated valve is powered through these wires off of that plug, and the plug is inserted into the switchable power outlet, which is run by the rightmost wire coming out of the bottom of that pH meter. The pH meter takes its reading through that center cable. The center cable is connected over to this probe, which is immersed in the tank. That probe allows it to sense just how many hydrogen ions are floating around in the tank, and you set that little dial to alarm when the pH rises, when it becomes alkaline enough that you want CO2 gas to be applied back into the tank. The resulting carbolic acid will drop the pH that the meter is reading, and the pH will begin to drop. Slowly, you hope. It'll be a lot quicker than the rise, but as it goes down, the alarm will shut off, then it'll interrupt power to that switched box. The valve will no longer have juice, and the valve will shut, and CO2 gas flow into the tank will be interrupted. Gradually, the water will become more and more alkaline, and gradually the pH will rise until it again trips the alarm on the pH meter. In order to artificially drive your pH in your tank high, in order to make it more alkaline, you carefully measure the water that you've added to the tank. You want to know what makeup water, what the hardness of the makeup water is going to be, what its pH is, what its hardness is, its general hardness, and every sort of parameter you can get out of it. And then you're going to artificially drive it more alkaline by adding a combination of baking soda and something like C-Chem Equilibrium. The two of those together I use to adjust my my water hardness, get it more alkaline, and then what I'm doing is I'm keeping it, that makes it hot, the pH higher. When I keep the pH lower, more acidic, it enables me to keep the carbon dioxide content of the tank higher, and that makes the plants grow. The gas coming out of that little throttle valve, it's not the best throttle valve in the world. It doesn't have terrific throttling characteristics. It's also metal. I would have preferred not to have metal in the line. I realize that the brass fittings on the solenoid valve are in fact metal, but if there is any liquid in the line, if there's any humidity even, you really don't want corrosive carbolic acid to build up. But this was the best little valve I could find. I'll replace that valve at some point with one that has better throttling characteristics. This whole split contraption is simply to get the size of the tubing, which comes out of the solenoid valve and then out of the throttle valve, to get that down to a small, typical 1/8" ID airline tubing. The carbon dioxide, the injection carbon dioxide gas flows through that line, goes through a check valve. Anytime you've got a gas bearing line, like an air line or a CO2 line, going into a tank of water, be aware of how easily that a disconnection further up toward the pressure source can result in siphoning that tank out onto your floor. Always make sure you have a check valve. You'd be surprised just how easily you can start pouring water, even out through a tiny little line like this, onto your neighbor in the downstairs apartment. The CO2 gas flows into the diffuser assembly through here. One moment, and we'll take a closer look at the diffuser assembly. Okay, here is the diffuser assembly. It is made from a repurposed gravel vacuum. Water would typically flow out the tube of the gravel vacuum and out through this cap. So the cap's a very useful thing. Inside each of these caps is a check valve. Now, the check valve in this end, the outlet, is just fine because typically the way the gravel filter comes from the store, the gravel vacuum comes from the store, you're supposed to allow water to flow out of the tube and up through the hose. So the cap at that end can stay exactly as it came from the store. The cap at this end, however, has a little piece, can you see it in that? A little piece of tubing inserted to defeat the check valve. Otherwise, there would not be any, the check valve in this cap would not allow water to flow out of this green U-bend plastic tubing and enter the body of the diffuser. Right? So you've got to defeat that check valve. You've either got to pull it out of there or you've got to like shove a piece of hose in there so that it can't clap shut. Water comes through this hose, of course, enters, goes past the defeated check valve, pours through the diffuser assembly, picks up the carbon dioxide, and exits out the bottom. The carbon dioxide gas is injected through this line, which comes out of the solenoid valve and the throttle valve there. It goes through this butt connector. The reason for that connector to be there is that it's going to form a bulkhead fitting against this plastic cap. Now I cut two holes in here. The first one is for carbon dioxide to flow in. Because the tube has to flare out to go around this little butt connector, when the connector's jammed down in there, it means gas can't easily escape out around the hose. One of those things that you would pay good money to have a well-crafted CO2 diffuser accomplish for you. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to worry that water or gas might escape out that little opening because this whole thing is going to sit in the aquarium. The CO2 gas continues down, makes a U-turn at the bottom of the diffuser assembly, and rises up until it just goes into the cap of the bubble counter. Now this bottle, that is the bubble counter, started life clear, but the carbon dioxide has etched it over time, this polycarbonate bottle. The CO2 gas bubbles out one little bubble at a time when you've set the flow by carefully regulating your regulator pressure and your throttle valve up there. You want to get just the right bubble rate so that the pH measured by the meter slowly drops over a nice long time. And then when the meter is satisfied and the solenoid valve shuts, you want the pH to slowly rise. So you have this nice rising and falling of the pH. Well, the falling of the pH occurs when you inject carbon dioxide gas into the system. So the bubbles are going to bubble up through that little short stub of tubing. They're going to enter the gas space at the top of the bubble counter. The reason there's going to be water here to allow you to see bubbles through this frosty glass is that you're going to fill this bubble counter about halfway with water before you assemble the thing. That lets you see the bubbles pop up, and it allows a gas space at the top. You can fill it all the way, and then gradually the gas space will spill over, go into this longer tube, and under the pressure of the accumulating gas up here in the bottle, make its way out and diffuse into the water column of this device through the ceramic air stone. Again, it's a ceramic air stone. It has to withstand the high carbolic acid content inside this diffuser. So, incoming gas, bubble, 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 one bubble at a time, rises up, goes into a space at the top. The rising pressure there forces the gas to come out and dissipate through the air stone, which is now the CO2 stone. And that CO2 in its tiny little bubble form permeates the water flow that's coming down through this diffuser. Any gas, CO2 gas at the top, gradually works its way into the flow of the water in between cycles of the solenoid valve. Now, the second penetration in this cap up here is merely a vent valve. The tube barely goes into the cap, and then there's a little L bend just to keep it tucked away up there. But what this allows you to do is open this valve and vent gas out of the diffuser unit. When you initially start the pump, you're really not going to be able to get enough pump pressure going to fill this chamber. This chamber is going to be full of room air. Well, that doesn't do any good. Trying to saturate room air into water doesn't, it's, I guess, oxygenates the water. It might be good for the fish, but that's not the whole point. You want this to be full of water so that the water can pick up the CO2. The only way this is going to be full of water is if you let the air out. The only way to let the air out is to build in a vent line. So that's what this is. It's a tiny little air-controlled vent valve, just rigged up to some airline tubing. It just punctures the top of this cap and then terminates inside the open. So you can let the air out of the diffuser. That's the diffuser assembly. Water enters through green, CO2 enters through here. Air, when you do the setup, when you turn the thing on, leaves through this vent line.